I suppose I should have been more cautious the first time my wife came home from her job at the art gallery, brimming with excitement over a new patron. But when you trust someone completely, especially after 17 worry-free years together, your instinct is to give them the benefit of the doubt. My instinct, however, was very wrong. I'm Daniel Garcia, and my wife is Sarah. We met at a small Midwestern university 18 years ago, started dating 17 years ago, and got married 16 years ago. Our family grew with the addition of our daughter 14 years ago and our son 12 years ago. I work as a computer programmer for a government agency, earning a decent, but not extraordinary salary. It was sufficient for Sarah to be a stay-at-home mom while our children were young. 2 years ago, feeling the kids were old enough, she decided to re-enter the workforce. She secured a 30-hour-per-week job at an upscale art gallery in town. This suited her perfectly. Sarah was an art major in college, so she was already well-versed in the world of art. The gallery attracted a clientele with deeper pockets than ours. We live in a large Midwestern city, so there was no shortage of affluent patrons to keep the gallery thriving. Sarah's job allowed her to mingle with these well-to-do individuals, enjoying a taste of their lifestyle before returning to her more modest reality. Occasionally, I'd join her at gallery events, tagging along as her plus one. It was a thrilling experience, rubbing shoulders with executives, politicians, attorneys, and bank presidents, far from the typical company a computer geek like me keeps. From time to time, Sarah would come home buzzing with stories of meeting some celebrity or influential person. Our kids and I would watch as she seemed to float through the house, temporarily lifted by her brush with glamour. Eventually, she crashed back down to the reality of our life. Unfortunately, Sarah didn't handle this transition gracefully. The kids would often retreat to their rooms, leaving me to absorb the brunt of her snarky comments about our life for the rest of the evening. Most of the time, I managed to take it in stride. When it did start to wear on me, I'd escape to the garage and tinker with my car. In recent weeks, Sarah had been endlessly talking about a new patron at the gallery, a hotshot real estate prodigy. James Smith, a 28-year-old millionaire, had recently moved into a lavish new home and was seeking art that matched his upscale lifestyle. Sarah seemed genuinely impressed by him, although she noted that he appeared quite taken with himself. She frequently mentioned how handsome and well put together he was, and often talked about his various physical pursuits, like bicycling and rock climbing. Sarah's enthusiasm about a new patron wasn't unusual, so I didn't think much of it. I let her go on about him for the next couple of weeks. Eventually, as I expected, her excitement waned, and I didn't hear another word about James Smith until I met him at the gallery's Christmas gala, just a few weeks before the holiday. I must admit, he was an impressive sight, standing about 6'2", 190 pounds, and looking solid in an expensive Armani suit. His blonde hair, blue eyes, and striking good looks even caught my somewhat skeptical eye. I hadn't been quite prepared for that. Our conversation lasted about 30 seconds as Sarah introduced us, but even in that brief time, I noticed him eyeing my wife from head to toe, much like a predator assessing its prey. Sarah was stunning that night in a blue tailored skirt and jacket, with just a hint of cleavage peeking from her white blouse. However, his look was more of a leer than simple admiration. Sarah seemed too preoccupied with the gala to notice, but I certainly did. As Sarah went off to mingle, I headed to the bar. I poured myself a shot of Jack Daniels over ice, and soon found David Brown, the husband of one of Sarah's coworkers. We had met before and got along well, often bonding over our shared interests in sports and cars. David and I chatted for a bit before I did some mingling myself. About an hour later, I noticed Sarah in a small group of people, with James Smith practically draped over her. I decided to intervene. I grabbed Sarah's usual drink, a Riesling, from the bar, and walked up to them. Introducing myself, I handed Sarah her glass of wine. Then, subtly but firmly, I removed James' hand from Sarah's right hip, where it had settled from around her back. He just smirked at me as he retracted his hand. I stayed with the group for a few minutes, and soon Sarah moved on to mingle with more guests while I went in a different direction, ensuring that James wasn't following her. I continued to mingle, expecting to see Sarah circulating among her coworkers. However, after an hour, I realized I hadn't seen her anywhere. I took a quick look around and noticed that James was also missing. Alarm bells went off in my head, so I made it a priority to find Sarah. Not finding her in the gallery, I stepped outside and circled the building. I saw clusters of people in the parking lot, seemingly preparing to leave, but still no sign of Sarah. Then, I noticed a black Jaguar XJ with a couple sitting rather intimately in the back seat. The car was running, and they were seated closely together. Trusting my instincts, I assumed it was Sarah and James. I walked up to the car and opened the door next to the woman. Both occupants jumped at the intrusion, and while I couldn't be sure if they were kissing, they were certainly close to it. "Time to go, dear. Now," I said in the firmest polite tone I could muster. We were just..." Sarah stammered as James offered me a smirk. "I don't care. It's time to leave," I reiterated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Really, Daniel, you have to come in and hear this sound system," James chimed in. "It's absolutely crystal clear." Soft concert music played from the car stereo, but it was obvious neither of them was paying attention to the music. "Another time, James. We really must be going," I replied noncommittally. I helped Sarah out of the car, and we began walking toward my Ford F-150. "Wait, I can't leave yet. The party's got another 2 hours. I'm supposed to stay and help host," Sarah protested urgently. "If your boss has an issue, he can call me directly," I said sharply. "What were you thinking?" "We were really just listening to his car's sound system. It's incredible," she insisted, awe still evident in her voice. "Aha," I replied dryly, unimpressed. Despite Sarah's claims, a coolness lingered between us for a couple of weeks. Eventually, I let it go, and things returned to normal. So it caught me off guard when, a few months later, Sarah announced she had accepted an invitation to James Lake Cottage for the 4th of July weekend. The guest list included us, Sarah's boss and his wife, and 2 other married couples who were friends of James. We were supposed to head up on Friday afternoon and stay until midday Sunday, with James hosting the entire weekend, featuring grilling, a full bar, swimming, boating, and other activities. I started to object, but before I could voice my concerns, Sarah cut me off, insisting we were going, and then walked away. The weekend actually started off splendidly. We spent several hours on James' sizable sailboat, enjoying the lake. The women looked stunning in their bikinis, while us guys managed to pull off the baggy swim trunks look. To be honest, James probably had the best physique among us, though thankfully he didn't seem to be any better endowed than the rest of us. Sarah, despite being the second oldest of the 5 women, was arguably the most striking in her black bikini, which accentuated her 36C bust and shapely figure without being overly revealing. James's backyard at the cottage was impressively set up with a top-notch grill and a fridge filled with beer, wine, and ice for mixed drinks. He marinated a batch of steaks and expertly worked the grill, while the rest of us lounged nearby, drinks in hand. James was the perfect host, and he kept his distance from Sarah, who also made sure to maintain a polite distance compared to their interactions around Christmas. The first night went smoothly, and we all retired to our rooms around midnight, with James, the only single person, retreating to the master bedroom alone. Saturday kicked off with a visit to the charming little tourist town by the lake, filled with quaint shops. The women returned with several purchases, clearly enjoying themselves. A hearty lunch of hero sandwiches followed, and then a spontaneous volleyball game broke out. After the game, the drinking began, and that night's grilling consisted of sausages and shredded pork. We relished another delicious meal and spent a couple of hours chatting. Later in the evening, Sarah's boss, John, suggested a walk around the lake, which I agreed to, thinking it was wise after all we had consumed. The walk took about 30 minutes, but upon our return, my mood soured. I found Sarah lounging in a chair, leaning back against James, who had his hands around her waist. As John and I approached, Sarah smiled and got up, albeit not hastily, clearly aware of my feelings. She avoided eye contact and took a seat in the chair next to me for most of the evening. Despite her apparent attempts to feign innocence, I caught Sarah and James exchanging furtive glances throughout the night, believing they went unnoticed. Similar to the previous night, the party began to wind down around midnight. The other three couples made their way to their respective bedrooms, but Sarah quietly asked me to join her in the kitchen. For the first time all evening, she looked me directly in the eyes and declared, "James has asked me to sleep in his bed tonight, and I've accepted his offer." I must have blacked out, or something. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah just told me she was going to spend the night with James. I stared at her in disbelief, unsure if I had understood correctly. "This isn't about love," she explained. "I've been completely faithful to you for 17 years, and you're the only man I love. But tonight, I want to be with James. He excites me, and I need to know what it feels like to be with a different man. After tonight, I promise I'll return to being your devoted wife for the rest of our lives, but I believe you owe me this one night." I stood there, stunned and speechless, trying to process her words. My wife was telling me she wanted to sleep with another man because she felt she deserved it, and I owed her that. "Over my dead body, are you going to sleep with him?" I finally managed to say. "This isn't up for negotiation, Daniel," she replied firmly. "Accept it for what it is. Tonight I am his. Tomorrow, and for the rest of my life, I'll be yours." "Don't be so sure about that, babe," I responded angrily. "Remember, there are consequences to every action." "God damn it, Daniel," she hissed. "You have to see everything so black and white. It's just one night, for God's sake. One night and done. You're going to ruin everything for everyone. Just one night. We never anticipated you being so intractable. I probably should have just kept my mouth shut and gone behind your back. But I was terrified that if you found out, it would definitely be the end of us. So I figured if you knew and let me go, it wouldn't be cheating." With that, she spun on her heel and walked away. As I emerged from the kitchen and moved into the living room, I saw Sarah take James' hand and lead him towards the master bedroom. My vision blurred, likely from the tears welling up in my eyes. I made my way to the indoor bar and poured myself a shot of Jack Daniels. It took me about 5 minutes to finish, and when I did, I quietly approached the master bedroom door. The unmistakable sounds of two people making love emanated from within. In that moment, I knew my life as I had known it was over. I downed several more shots of Jack, desperately trying to figure out my next move. My initial impulse was to leave and initiate a divorce immediately, but the thought of being away from my kids for most of the time was unbearable. I couldn't see how that decision would benefit either me or them. Yet, the reality of my wife being in another man's bed at that very moment was something I couldn't just accept. For a fleeting moment, I even contemplated burning the house down, but sanity prevailed. At some point, I must have passed out because when I checked my watch, it was 3 a.m., and the entire house was eerily quiet. I stumbled into the bedroom that Sarah and I had been assigned. The bed was still neatly made since it hadn't been slept in, just as I expected. I collapsed on top of the bedspread and attempted to sleep, though it was restless. By 7:30 a.m., I dragged myself out of bed, took a quick shower, and brushed my teeth before heading to the kitchen. The other three couples were already up, enjoying a breakfast of bacon and eggs. Emily, the wife of Sarah's boss John, seemed to be the chief cook and offered me a plate as the others mumbled their good mornings. The sideways glances and pitying looks made it clear that everyone knew what had happened. My face burned with humiliation, knowing I was the center of their unspoken pity. "It's okay, Daniel. We've all seen this before, Emily said sympathetically as the others nodded in agreement. James has done this 3 or 4 other times. He's an alpha male. When he sees something he wants, he goes after it. It's just the way he's wired. I also think he enjoys the humiliation aspect of it, John added, but I don't think it's personal. It's just his nature. So what happened to those other couples he's done this to? I asked. Well, as far as I know, they're all still married, Emily replied. It's kind of silly to break up a marriage of many years over one night if you think about it, especially when there are kids involved. Ashley, one of the other wives, chimed in. You mean he specifically targets married women with children so the kids can be used as leverage for the affair? I asked incredulously. It kind of looks that way, chimed in Christopher, Ashley's husband. But honestly, he's a great guy aside from that one quirk. I've known him since college, and once you're his friend, you've got a friend for life. So I can overlook that flaw. Plus, it doesn't seem to harm the couples in the long run. For instance, James helped his last affair and her husband get a fantastic deal on a condo in North Carolina. Now he even stays with them when he's in the area. Just then, we heard moaning coming from the master bedroom. It was Sarah, and the sounds made it clear that her night with James had extended into the morning. Everyone at the table turned red with embarrassment, while I felt a cold fury rising within me. Why don't we finish breakfast on the deck? Emily suggested. Sarah and James joined us on the deck about 30 minutes later, both looking freshly showered and quite pleased with themselves. I had to admit, Sarah was positively glowing and didn't seem the least bit ashamed of the situation. Carrying a plate of breakfast, she came over to the chaise where I was sitting and perched on the edge, while I moved my feet to make room for her. Her back faced me, and I noticed the pink hue of her skin above her tank top. There was also a noticeable bite mark on her right shoulder, just under the strap of her tank and bra. She acknowledged me with just a nod, and I saw no reason to break the silence. So, what are everyone's plans for this afternoon? James asked in a convivial, host-like manner. I think we need to get back and spend some time with the kids this afternoon, don't you, sweetie? I said, addressing Sarah's back. She hesitated for a moment, and I could tell from the subtle movement of her hair that she was rolling her eyes at me. One of those instinctive cues you pick up after being together for so long. Sitting across from everyone else, her eye roll was on full display, and it took all my self-control not to reach over and slap the back of her unfaithful head. I was hoping we could stay a bit longer and maybe go sailing again, dear, she said flatly. Nope, we need to get back. You finish your breakfast, I'll load the car. Wheels moving in 10 minutes, I said as I headed inside. I packed the car in record time. When I returned to the deck, Sarah was just finishing her breakfast. I grabbed her by the wrist, gave a quick wave, said a hurried goodbye to everyone, and practically dragged Sarah to the car. I didn't need to look at anyone's faces to gauge their thoughts. I already knew because I was thinking the same thing. With the exception of the radio playing softly, the drive was shrouded in silence for the first 45 minutes. Sarah mostly stared out the passenger window, likely avoiding eye contact to prevent an eruption. She must have sensed that meeting my gaze would spark the inevitable confrontation. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Was it worth it? I half hissed, half spoke. She remained still for a moment before taking a deep breath and turning toward me. Yes, it was wonderful, she cooed, a distant look in her eyes. That was not the response I expected. I wasn't sure what to expect, maybe some stammering, a partial truth, a lot of backpedaling, perhaps an apology, but certainly not the blunt, unvarnished truth. Her expression confirmed it. She wasn't lying. 17 years, 2 kids, everything we've built together, undone in one night, I asked. She turned further toward me, her face a mix of sadness and resignation. That's up to you, Daniel, she replied. I promised this was a one-time thing. And now I'll be as faithful as I was before last night. It was an incredible night, and now it's over. But if you can lose your love for me that quickly and are willing to break up our family, then do what you need to do. Just remember, I'll get the kids, and I'll make sure they know you ruined our family." I was stunned into silence, not even an apology, and she was prepared to pin the breakdown of our family on me. She and James must have orchestrated this perfectly. I had never seen this side of Sarah before, and I certainly didn't like it. So, I can assume then that this morning's activity with James was a calculated move meant to humiliate me. I asked. Not entirely. He wanted one more time before I resumed being the faithful wife to my husband. He's willing to play by my rules. We stopped at the in-laws to pick up the kids. For Sarah, it was as if nothing had changed. Despite my good relationship with her parents, Matthew and Jessica, I could barely face them. It felt like they somehow knew Sarah had betrayed me, and I was engulfed in shame and humiliation. I wanted to scream the truth about their daughter, but knew this wasn't the time or place. Sarah sported a bemused look the entire time we were there, clearly enjoying my discomfort and relishing the upper hand. This was definitely not the way to make amends, I thought. Later, Sarah got into bed after I did. I was facing away from her when she climbed in and spooned behind me. I felt her hand begin to caress my body. After she tried to bring me to arousal twice, I turned to face her and slowly shook my head. "Not happening tonight," I said. "There's nothing you can do to get me out for you. You'll just have to be satisfied with what James gave you last night and this morning." For the first time since Saturday night, Sarah showed weakness. She looked hurt and shocked by my refusal of her advances, one of the very few times this had ever happened between us. "But don't you want to reclaim me for yourself? James says it's almost an automatic response for men in situations like this," she said, her voice tinged with incredulity. "Oh, did he now? So, not only is he a real estate genius, but he's also a therapist. Well, he should have warned you that some men don't see what you did as a challenge. Some of us see it as a complete betrayal." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. In our 17 years together, I had never spoken to her this way, and I had certainly never cursed at her before. She withdrew her hand as I rolled onto my back and pretended to sleep. I could hear her quietly crying, but I didn't care. I scheduled an appointment with a reputable divorce attorney for the following week. The meeting, to say the least, did not go well. Joshua Martinez had to explain to me twice that my options were limited to essentially giving up half my assets and partial custody of my kids, or sticking it out for their sake, and still giving up half my assets if we divorced once they were of age. We've all seen parents who live for their children, and then find themselves with nothing in common once the kids leave home, leading to divorce. That was the scenario my attorney laid out. Be a super parent for the next 6 years, then divorce Sarah as soon as the kids were no longer a concern. At least in my case, I didn't have to worry about Sarah running around if she kept her promise. So, that's what I did. If my kids were involved in an activity, I usually took the lead and made sure Sarah was involved too. There was no reason I should be the only one enduring the St. Club fundraiser or working on a 4-H woodworking project. We became the parents everyone admired, but also pitied. On the physical side, I didn't touch Sarah sexually for 6 months. Eventually, she told me that if I didn't fulfill my husbandly duties, she would have to look elsewhere. Since I was on the brink myself, I rationalized that I could be with Sarah in the same physical way she had been with James, and no other way. After all, she was still a beautiful woman. It wasn't like I was being forced to be intimate with someone unattractive. Our first night back in the saddle wasn't pretty, but it set the tone for the next few years. We had a date night at one of our favorite Italian restaurants, and I made sure Sarah had a couple more glasses of wine than usual. She was a bit more randy than normal, and when I suggested we head to bed while the kids were engrossed in a movie, she didn't hesitate. Like two horny teenagers, we stripped down quickly. After a brief kiss, I pushed her onto the bed. Then she moaned. Not just any moan, but the same one we'd all heard at the lake cottage that fateful Sunday morning. Caught up in long-forgotten emotions, we fulfilled our marital duty with an intensity that overwhelmed us. We lay together for about 10 more minutes before disengaging. "Where the hell did that come from?" she stage whispered. "Holy shit, Daniel. Am I going to have to wait another 6 months for a repeat performance?" I couldn't answer, so I just spooned into her back. Every time I thought of Sarah with James, anger surged within me, leaving no room for tenderness in our lovemaking. Nonetheless, she seemed to enjoy it, and never complained, though we rarely cuddled or talked tenderly afterward, as had been our custom before the incident. Life fell into what I assumed would be our new normal. Once a month, I hired a private investigator to ensure Sarah was keeping her word about not seeing James or anyone else. It cost a lot, but it afforded me some peace of mind. 6 years later, our youngest, Andrew, left for college at Michigan State. Amanda was already a junior at Michigan, leading to a summer-long sibling rivalry after Andrew made his decision. As a freshman, he was staying in a dorm, and Sarah and I helped him move in a week before classes started. Neither of us remembered needing half the stuff that Andrew had packed. We took Andrew up to Michigan State on a Thursday and stayed the weekend, leaving late on Sunday. Exactly 30 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, I conference called both kids and in a calm and quiet manner informed them that I was divorcing their mother because she had cheated on me several years ago. They were both devastated. "I thought you guys were so great together. How could this happen?" Amanda almost shouted into the phone. "I thought we were great together too," I replied. "But your mother cheated on me with James Smith 6 years ago during a 4th of July weekend with several other couples. She told me up front that she planned to do it so she wouldn't be sneaking around. She promised to remain faithful afterward. She didn't see it as cheating, but I did. I warned her there would be consequences if she went through with it. Apparently, she and James had planned it out. And she threatened that if I left, she'd get half of our assets and turn you both against me. I couldn't risk losing you too, so I endured it until you both came of age." Andrew was the first to respond. "I'll be damned. Did she give you any reason for pulling this?" "Not really," I said. "She just knew I would cave in to avoid losing you too, and to a point, she was right." "Dad, is she still seeing anyone?" Amanda asked. "Not as far as I can tell, baby. I've had a PI trailing her 1 week a month since then, and it seems she's kept her promise." "Then why can't you forgive her, Dad?" Andrew asked tentatively. "You've been married for 22 years, and she only did it once." "Once was more than enough," I said, struggling to keep my anger in check. "What kind of love did she show me when she spent the night in another man's bed? What kind of respect did she have for me when they went at it the next morning while we could all hear? I'm sorry, kids, I just don't have it in my heart to forgive her. I stayed with her to keep the family together. I love you both." "Thanks, Dad. We appreciate you holding it together for us," Amanda responded. "Does she already know?" Andrew asked. "She will know in a few minutes. She's being served at 4 o'clock at her office." "Oh, Dad, bad move," Amanda said. "In front of her boss and coworkers, she'll be crushed and humiliated. Please don't do this to her, Dad." "It's too late, baby. Besides, I planned it this way on purpose. Her boss and his wife were among the people at the lake house when this happened. If you think I wasn't humiliated enough already, imagine how I felt the next morning when your mother started moaning with James. I just wanted to disappear. So, yes, I want her to feel that same sting of humiliation. While I don't agree with this, Dad, I guess I understand it," Amanda replied. "I'm with you, Dad. I've got your back completely," Andrew added. At 4:07, my cell rang. "Yes," I answered. "I'm on my way home now, you bastard. When I get there, I'm going to kick your balls all the way to next week." Sarah shrieked into the phone. My money was on contrite and tearful. "Shows what I know," I said before ending the call. I sat in the family room watching ESPN, waiting. When I heard the garage door go up and Sarah's car pull in, I turned off the TV and stood up, ready to defend myself if needed. I had never hit a woman before, but I was prepared if necessary. As usual, Sarah entered through the utility room, looking furious. She marched right up to me, so I shifted slightly to my right, preventing her dominant right foot from landing a kick to my groin. An old fighter's trick. I also raised both hands in a defensive position. She stopped, appeared to size me up as if trying to figure out how to hit me, and then crumbled onto the sofa in tears. I thought we were good. I really thought we were good, she muttered. You never mentioned divorce all these years. You assumed we were good just because you were, I replied calmly. But I kept my promise to you. I haven't slept with anyone since that night with James at the lake. I wasn't planning to ever betray you again. You did keep that promise, but you broke a vow you made to me 16 years earlier when you did it. I warned you not to go through with it, but you threatened to take the kids away from me. I couldn't stand by and let that happen. And you had me served at the gallery in front of John and all my coworkers. Could you be any crueler? She asked. Having John there completed the circle you started at the lake house 6 years ago. As for cruelty, that Sunday morning was the most humiliating moment of my life. Revenge felt justified. Sarah continued sobbing, but I could see a glimmer of recognition in her eyes. 6 years ago, you told me sleeping with James was worth it, that it was wonderful. Still feel that way now. But I've kept my promise since then. I've been completely faithful for over 6 years, she whined. So what's the expiry date on a promise from you? I fired back. If your vow meant nothing after 16 years, is your promise only good for half of that, say, 8 years? Daniel, I am truly sorry if that one incident is leading to divorce, but I confessed it to you. I didn't cheat. Yes, you did, I insisted. Just because you told me about it beforehand instead of sneaking around doesn't make it right. We didn't discuss it. You decided it with him. We didn't agree to it. You and he did. You broke your vow to me. You're sorry about the divorce it's causing, but you're not sorry about the act itself. You've never been sorry about the act. I didn't give you a hall pass. We didn't agree to some arrangement. You just made a decision and expected me to accept it. You tore my heart out that weekend, Sarah, and on the drive home, you told me it was my problem, that I had to get over it, or you'd take the kids away. Does that sound like love to you? Because it sure doesn't to me. She just looked at me stunned. Sarah hired a good lawyer who convinced a judge that we needed couples counseling. At our first session, the counselor, a young and attractive woman of about 30, asked me why I couldn't get past Sarah cheating on me just one time, especially since she hadn't gone behind my back to sleep with James. I looked at her as if she had two heads, and then asked if she had ever been married, noticing she wasn't wearing any rings on her left hand. My marital status has nothing to do with your answer, Mr. Garcia, she replied defensively. That's exactly the wrong answer, I said, standing up to leave. Both women sat motionless as I exited the room. Later that night, I received a call from Matthew and Jessica, Sarah's parents. I dearly loved them. My own parents had passed away several years ago, and I had become even closer to Matthew and Jessica since then. They returned my love wholeheartedly, but I knew they'd have to side with their daughter. It's just what parents do. I hadn't spoken to them since Sarah was served with the divorce papers several weeks earlier. Both of them were on the line on speaker. After exchanging pleasantries, Jessica started the conversation. Daniel, why do you have to be such a hard ass about this? She asked. You know Sarah loves you with all her heart and has kept her promise since that incident. Why do you have to be so intractable? What exactly did she tell you about that weekend? I asked. Well, honey, she told us that you two talked about her sleeping with some guy for one night and that she promised to be faithful to you forever afterward. She said she told you up front instead of sneaking around because she really loves you and didn't want to lose you. That's only half the story, Mom. Are you two sitting down? Say what you need to say, Daniel. We're sitting, her father answered curtly. We didn't discuss it. She and James did. I was informed. I was told I had no say in the matter, that it was happening whether I liked it or not, and that if I made waves, she'd get the kids and turn them against me. I warned her not to do it, but it didn't make a damn bit of difference. So they had their fun that night, and just to further humiliate me, they had another round the next morning, with the rest of us initially sitting in the living room until your daughter got too loud, forcing us to move out to the backyard. I've never felt so humiliated in my life. And when we got home, Sarah told me just how wonderful their time had been. Does that sound like a loving wife? Does that sound like someone who truly cares about her husband? It sure doesn't to me. But you stayed with her for 6 more years? Her father asked. No, I stayed for my children. But the love, well, it started dying that night and continued to wither a little more each day. I'll never love her like I once did. I heard Jessica sobbing. We're sorry, son. We didn't know the full story, Matthew said. We should have realized it had to be worse for you to just walk away. Thank you for staying all those years for the kids. With Sarah and her lawyer trying every tactic to delay, the divorce took about a year. Maybe Sarah thought I would lose the will to fight and just stay married. She should have known that wasn't going to happen, although I didn't realize it at the time. Being an involved parent as my kids grew up kept my standing high in social circles and gave me a glimpse into the personal lives of other parents. I got to know a lot more divorcees in my age group than I would have otherwise, and I used that knowledge to my benefit when my divorce finally became official. I took day trips, went to restaurants and dance clubs on weekends, and almost always had an entertaining companion. Many were the divorced mothers of my kids' friends, and others were friends of friends. The old adage that everything is out there if you're willing to look for it proved true. I made love more often, and with more partners than I did before I was married. Life wasn't bad if I ignored the hole in my heart that Sarah had left. I moved into a 3-bedroom condo after the divorce because I wanted space for my kids to stay with me whenever they wanted. I knew they were initially angry with Sarah after the divorce, but I hoped they'd eventually get over it, and maybe split their time between us until they moved out permanently. For their sake, I hoped they and Sarah would come to some sort of agreement, but I wasn't going to be the one to broker that deal. Sarah had wronged all 3 of us, and I wasn't about to smooth her way back into the kids' lives. While it didn't surprise me that both kids chose to live with me during their breaks from college, what did catch me off guard was how quickly Sarah's parents re-entered the picture. During the divorce proceedings, I hadn't heard much from them, which I understood. Yet, about 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Jessica called and invited me to dinner at Maggiano's, a nice Italian restaurant in our city. Considering how well we had gotten along before the divorce, I saw no reason to decline, and the evening turned out to be delightful. The night started off a bit awkwardly, with Matthew and Jessica apologizing for Sarah's actions and any animosity that might have arisen because they had supported her, at least until they learned the full story. I'd assured them that their apologies were accepted and that I understood their need to support their daughter. I then suggested we change the subject, and the evening improved from there, despite occasional comments and tears over what might have been. Reconnecting with Matthew and Jessica brought a sense of normalcy back into my life, and I believe they enjoyed my company as much as I valued theirs. We seldom talked about Sarah, except when reminiscing about past events. We started getting together a couple of times a month while the kids were away at school, and even more frequently when they were home. It was only a matter of time before I introduced a new person into our gatherings. I began dating Megan about 18 months after the divorce. I had been casually dating and not actively searching for Ms. Right when Megan and her friends walked into a restaurant where the kids and I were having a Saturday night meal. She and her 3 friends were seated just a table away. Although I wasn't particularly attentive, my kids were quick to notice. "Hey, Dad, did you see those women who just sat down?" Amanda whispered. "They're all attractive, and 3 of them aren't even wearing wedding rings." "Amanda, I don't need you playing matchmaker," I replied, a bit exasperated. "Dad, she's right. There's some serious potential at that table," Andrew chimed in. Curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced over. The kids were right. Well, I'll be damned. Maybe I do need your help, I admitted to Amanda with a grin. After we finished dinner, I handed Amanda the car keys and told the kids I'd find an Uber home. I then introduced myself to the table of lovely ladies, who quickly invited me to join them. As they ate, I sipped a shot of Eagle Rare bourbon. Did you seriously just ditch your kids to flirt with us? What kind of dad does that? Asked Olivia, the long-haired blonde sitting at my 10 o'clock. I'm a dad who trusts his kids' good taste. When they pointed out that 3 of you weren't wearing wedding rings, I faced 2 options. Head home to watch a baseball game and endure endless teasing from my kids, or come over here and have an amazing conversation with 4 lovely women. Plus, they've always told me that it's just as easy to love a good-looking stepmom as it is an unattractive one. Wow, that's an interesting approach, big guy, commented the married brunette at my 2 o'clock. It's not an approach, just a confident guy with 2 smart, outspoken kids who, I should add, have excellent taste. So, who's the leader here? The women burst into laughter, even Samantha, the one I had singled out. For that, big guy, you get to tell your story first, she said with a smile. I gave them a condensed version of my life, summarizing my 17-year marriage and subsequent divorce. Not convincing enough. Romeo, if you're such a great guy, how did your wife slip away? Asked Megan, the raven-haired beauty, at my 8 o'clock. 3 of us here are divorcees, so we'd like to know early if we're wasting our time. I appreciate the directness, I responded with a smile. For the first time since my divorce 2 years ago, I laid out my entire story, even the painful parts. Until then, the only people who knew the whole truth were Sarah's parents and my divorce lawyer. When I finished, the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Everyone had tears in their eyes, and I could feel my own welling up. Well, that's one way to bring the mood down, Rachel remarked, gently touching my right arm from my 4 o'clock. I'm sorry, ladies. I usually try not to dwell on the past. Look on the bright side. I got 2 great kids out of it, and my in-laws aren't too bad, either. Your in-laws? You're kidding, right? Megan exclaimed. Now you're really pushing the limits of believability. Nobody likes their in-laws that much, especially after a divorce. What can I say? I'm special. I noticed their plates were empty and said, if you ladies are done eating, this round of drinks is on me. I'd love to hear your stories. We ended up staying through 3 more rounds, sharing our experiences. Olivia had divorced her serial cheater spouse. Megan and Rachel's marriages had dissolved due to irreconcilable differences. And Samantha, well, she had been happily married to the world's best husband for 26 years, a title she repeated several times, with the other 3 nodding in agreement each time. Meeting this man became a high priority for me. The women told me they had a monthly girls' night out, and my presence was bending the rules for Samantha. But Samantha suggested that if she could bring her husband to the next outing, I could come too, if I wanted. The other 3 readily agreed. Can I bring a date? I asked with a cheeky grin. A month later, we all reconvened at the same restaurant, and I met Samuel, Samantha's husband. By the end of the evening, I found myself agreeing that he might indeed be the world's best husband. We hit it off instantly. Our monthly outings continued, and over time, I developed genuine friendships with the 3 single women. Sometimes we hung out as a group of 4, and other times I went on dates with one of them. Some of those dates ended in passionate encounters. They were all amazing in bed, and I always gave my best effort. I enjoyed it immensely, and judging by their enthusiastic responses, they did too. After about a year, Megan and I decided to become exclusive. I remained good friends with Olivia and Rachel, but we all understood that exclusivity meant just that. Even so, the banter could get a bit daring when the girls got together. It was all in good fun, though sometimes it even made me blush. My kids quickly grew comfortable around Megan, while my in-laws took a bit longer to warm up to her. I understood and didn't push the matter. A steady girlfriend for me likely signaled to them that the slim chances of Sarah and me reconciling were disappearing. But over time, they began to see in Megan the qualities I admired, and given the strong bond I shared with my in-laws, it was only a matter of time before they started to feel natural around her and began treating her with the same warmth they showed me. After Megan had been around my in-laws about half a dozen times, Jessica, my ex-mother-in-law, pulled me aside looking unusually serious. My heart raced, fearing some imminent family drama. "Daniel, maybe I don't have the right to say this, but too bad. I'm saying it anyway," she began, her tone firm. "How long have you been dating this woman? Don't you think it's time you put a ring on her finger before somebody else gets that bright idea?" I tried to maintain my composure, but I was grinning inside. When your ex-mother-in-law points it out, maybe it's time to act. "You're right, Mom. I need to lock this girl up. I guess I've been a little gun-shy," I admitted. "Do it soon, you big lug," she responded with a smile. 6 weeks later, I took Megan to Maggiano's for her 47th birthday. I told her to dress for the occasion, and she emerged in an iconic little black dress. Even without pregnancies, Megan always maintained a stunning figure, partly due to her dedication at the gym. Her dress was about 5 inches above her knees and cut low in the front, perfectly accentuating her beautiful 36Cs. Heads turned all night, and it took everything in me not to drool during dinner. We both ordered cheesecake for dessert, and our waiter soon approached with a tray holding 2 slices and a bottle of champagne. "We didn't order the champagne," Megan whispered, puzzled. "No, we didn't." "I did," I whispered back, smiling. "It's for toasting right after I slip this ring onto your finger." After I talked with Jessica, I had visited my favorite jeweler to have a custom diamond engagement ring made. He did a remarkable job, and Megan, upon seeing it, immediately burst into tears. Amidst the joyful sobbing, I distinctly heard a heartfelt yes. We opted for a simple spring wedding. Andrew stood by my side as my best man, and Samantha was Megan's matron of honor. No, I didn't invite Sarah. Though I knew it pained Matthew and Jessica, I couldn't consider my ex-wife a friend. Our interactions were limited to events involving the kids, while we maintained cordiality during these occasions. Unlike some who managed to forge a friendship post-divorce, it wasn't in the cards for us. The wound of disrespect was too deep for me to truly forgive. My children eventually forgave their mother, and that was fine by me as she is their mother. We didn't discuss Sarah among ourselves, and my in-laws didn't bring her up either. Megan got along well with Sarah during group gatherings, and I was delighted to be grandparents. When grandchildren began to arrive, here, I witnessed a side of Megan I hadn't anticipated. Sarah and I were delighted to be grandparents, but Grandma Megan was ecstatic. She had unfulfilled maternal instincts that the grandchildren happily tapped into. She became a joyful, devoted grandmother, practically ridiculous in her enthusiasm. Sarah remarried and divorced twice more after me. Reflecting on this, Megan once remarked that Sarah might be searching for someone like me, but was unable to find him. She then asked me for a promise that I would never leave her. "There's no need for me to promise that," I replied. "I made you a vow." Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.